Good afternoon, everybody. Really great to be back in Ontario. It's been a few years since I did one of these big road shows, and so I'm going to talk about cow comfort this afternoon, but I'm really going to try to link it to some of the themes introduced this morning with regard to manure handling and sustainability that Ian introduced. So we're going to talk about social trust, and the social trust is part of the three pillars of that sort of dreaded sustainability word. And this was put together by a group of scientists trying to imagine what makes the dairy industry sustainable through the next several decades. And it's a combination of working with the environment, talking about social trust, as we mentioned, but also maintaining economic viability. So touching on each of those three, we don't have a farming industry if you're not able to make a living doing it. And so economics is obviously a key aspect of sustainability. You all know that, to be a sustainable farm, you have to maintain the health of your soils, you have to deal with the potential pollutants that our cows produce, and we talked already this morning about manure and greenhouse gases. But we have to work with the environment to be sustainable. And finally, the piece I'm going to focus here most on is this social trust piece. And that's just an understanding that we're developing a product and expecting consumers to buy it and consume it, and they wish to do so knowing that those products are safe and that the animals producing them are well cared for. So those are the three pillars of sustainability. Just to touch again on working with the environment and the main theme of greenhouse gas emissions, which is getting an awful lot of press both here and in the US at the moment. When you look at the data, and I did a similar sort of data dive as Ian has done and presented this morning with US data, which has been summarized over the last 10 years or so with the most recent EPA estimates. So how much, methane and carbon dioxide equivalents do cows produce? Well, our dairy population is about less than 2% of US emissions. We're down in here and here. Emissions from enteric fermentation and from manure management are the key issues. They seem to ignore these big bars up here, which are transport and industry. And we are, as you look at granting agencies and the interest in the industry, going to spend probably billions of dollars over the next 5 to 10 years to reduce that 2% to 1.8%. I'm not sure how big an impact this is going to have on overall greenhouse gas emissions, but this is the world that we live in, and I too share concerns that I want to have a role in terms of improving and maintaining the climate for our future generations, but the focus on dairy cows seems a little misaligned. So then I ask, well, how many people eat meat and drink milk, and how many people don't? Well, trying to find that data is really hard. If you ask Google how many vegetarians there are, you get lots of different answers. The estimates are that there are probably quite a lot of vegetarians in certain countries, maybe more than 10% of the population in places like India, Mexico, Taiwan, Switzerland, Israel, New Zealand, Germany, Sweden. Not all because of a lifestyle choice, some because meat's expensive and people can't afford to purchase it. Within the US, and I suspect somewhat similar to the situation in Canada, it looks like about 5 to 8% of the population would be classified as vegetarian. And they are a vocal bunch, aren't they? You would think that it's about 50% of the population based on press articles that you read, but it looks like it's 5 to 8% based on the available data, and it's actually been declining. There are obviously populations with far more people that are vegetarians. 74% of vegetarians are women. And there are age stratifications and stratifications by politics, for example. But the bottom line is, what I was left with was about 95% of the people eat meat and drink milk. That's a lot of people still. So the concerns and the worries that we're confronted with, maybe you have to put that into some perspective. Because then we're told, well, you know, the animals are eating all the food, and we've argued against that as the reality. The cattle actually eat a lot of byproducts that we can't utilize. But my friend Mary Beth Hall, who lives in the building next door to the vet school, actually modeled this and put a model forward to say, okay, let's take animal agriculture out of the equation and put all that land to food production. And so what changes does that make to greenhouse gas emissions and so on? Well, if we imagine a US without animal agriculture and we just grow plants, we can actually increase the available food supply by about 23%. So it does increase the food supply. That food is largely corn and soybeans, because if you want to grow vegetables right now, you're probably doing that anyway based on the returns that you can get from that enterprise. So the available land, instead of being grading food that is consumed by cattle or other ag species, would grow corn and soybeans. That reduces greenhouse gas emissions by a disappointing 2.6%. So it does reduce greenhouse gas emissions, but not by as much as you think, because, well, one, cattle aren't the biggest problem, and two, you actually have to manufacture fertilizers because you lose animal manure, and we've just learned this morning how important that is. So in that manufacturing process, that emits greenhouse gases, and so there's a relatively disappointing reduction overall. And then you have to live in a world with corn and soybeans, and that diet is somewhat deficient in fatty acids, certain key minerals and vitamins, and not particularly a world I want to live in, but again, we key back to the reality that a lot of people eat meat and drink milk. And then you're told that, well, the plant-based milks are taking over. Oat milk, almond milk, soy milk, everybody's buying these milk alternatives. And in terms of the growth of the market share, because those alternatives are expensive and they charge a lot for them, that's a lot of dollars being generated from those products. But if you actually look at the volume, cow's milk is still 90+% of the total volume of all milk and milk alternatives being sold last year. And yes, the total fluid market continues to decrease. That's a reality that is year on year, but also the reality is the consumption of dairy increases pretty much year on year. So while fluid sales are going down, the consumption of butter and cheese and yogurt and other products, other dairy products, are more than compensating for that. And so, again, we are living in a world where 95% of the people want to consume the products that you make, and the biggest risk to us is for those people to consume less, not to not consume them at all. And so that gets back to the importance of maintaining trust, of making sure that the people that are consuming those products can do so and feel good about it. They don't want to feel guilty about consuming those products, and maintaining trust, realizing that the vast majority of consumers don't understand how you produce milk from your dairy cows. It's a complex process. A lot of people live in urban environments. They're not from farms, so these are abnormal things to them. But there's a trust that they are relying on our society and our industry to regulate itself, to self-regulate. And if we're not trusted to do that, then that erosion of trust can mean that regulation occurs in other ways. And that's something that I don't think any of us want. And so that's the risk that we face if we lose that trust. So I get it. I've worked with farmers for 25 plus years now. I get it. You just want to get on and farm. Right? Yeah, that's what farmers want to do. But you sell a product to consumers. And so they have a concern too that we have to bring into the equation now. 15, 20 years ago, we didn't worry about it so much. Now we have to. That's the reality of the time. Consumers and concerned citizens want farmers to ensure that their animals live a reasonably good life. This is the term that appears a lot now in animal welfare speak, living a reasonably good life. And when they buy your products, they don't want to feel guilty. That's really key. Is there an airplane landing or something? Okay. We lose trust when we do unexpected things. So the industry changes and evolves, and oh my goodness, over the last 2 decades, we've seen huge amounts of change in our own dairy industries. But as we go from grazing to tie stalls, to larger freestall facilities, to open lot dairying, some of those things are unexpected. And again, because consumers aren't involved in rural life, those things can be a surprise and erode trust. Doing things that are unexpected, and part of this is perhaps education, is a risk. And when things appear on social media, because we have social media now, lots of it, those things can really come to play pretty seriously. And our animal welfare discussion in the US was virtually non-existent before 2008. And in 2008, HSUS did an undercover expose of a slaughter plant in California. And they showed fairly egregious animal handling and some videos that just weren't very defendable and created a lot of negative impact to the industry. A lot of good came from that video as well, which perhaps we don't focus on quite as much, but it did change the conversation we had in the US, and it was the start of farm assurance programs the very next year. You guys waited a little bit of a while before catching up, but in 2014, you had the British Columbia expose on a farm over in Chilliwack. And that had a similar negative impact on the industry, and similarly set up the situation where we required some degree of oversight. And so in the world that we live in North America, change isn't evoked by legislation. We don't generally create laws to tell us what to do and how to farm, but change is being invoked through animal activism, and those groups can influence what consumers see, hear, and read, and that can in turn exert pressure on the brand names through social media, through their boards of directors and stakeholders, through propositions in certain states in the US, and the brand names react. These are all the brand names down here, and they respond. And they set expectations of the supply chain through National Milk Producers Federation, through co-ops. This is the mechanism. And there's a mechanism for change. And a lot of it is positive in terms of animal welfare. Some of it is negative. But that's the world we live in. That's how things are evolving. And this is why both the US and Canada have arrived in the same place. We have these large national programs in Pro-Action for You and the Dairy Farm Program for Us that cover 99% of the supply chain and are an effort of the industry to provide oversight of itself, to maintain that social trust. Some of you may not like that. I understand, but that is the world we live in, and that's where we find ourselves. Those programs, and I've certainly been involved in some of them, in their development, have relied largely on outcome-based measures. We measure lameness and hock lesions and back injuries, and here tail breaks now that we leave tails on our cows in the US. These are outcomes, and I've argued strongly over the last decade to focus on outcomes, not focus on how we got there, but do we have a cow that's healthy and has been arrived in a situation with good welfare. That's outcome. What we're starting to see is a switch and a focus to process, and the process would be how you rear calves, how much overstocking you can do in your barns. They're more interested in how are you doing things. And we've fought against that for a while, but I see as we move forward that there'll be a greater focus on process control. When animal welfare audits are done correctly and implemented by well-trained people that know how to locomotion score, where we provide help for the farm, because audits don't solve problems, they identify them. The network of consultants and veterinarians and nutritionists are there to help you resolve these issues. And when you do that, we've achieved remarkable results. This is a group of 400 plus herds that direct ship to Danone in the US. And we have worked on an audit program with very stringent requirements, very high levels of tolerance for lameness, no severely lame cows, basically less than 1%, less than 9% any cow with a noticeable limp. And we've been able to achieve an endpoint where the farms are better than that. On average, the farms exceed those expectations because we set the standard. And they met that standard moving forward because they were able to do so. So we know we have the tools to be able to get to these remarkable outcomes, and outcome assessment has helped. I think it has clearly helped. But the conversation of animal welfare is continued to evolve over time, not from just preventing bad things, and a lot of animal welfare audits are trying to prevent the bad stuff, the willful abuse, the poor animal handling, the excessive, hitting cows, obviously. Now the conversation is more about promoting good things, promoting a reasonably good life, promoting positive experiences, such as providing a grooming brush for a cow. There's no dollars and cents really involved in that, but it promotes a positive experience and promotes positive, good animal welfare. That's how the conversation has evolved. And so with that is a conversation about adding more process control into audits. And within the new ProAction that you see, you'll see evidence of that there is a greater influence and an interest in process control. And we see that too in the changes that we have in our own programs. So as examples for that, there is significant concern, and I'm well aware of where I am in Ontario with a large tie stall industry, that there's concern about tethering and restriction of movement. That just really isn't going away and very difficult to get around in that management system. When you ask the people what they think of tie stalls, well, many of them don't know what a tie stall is, but when you tell them what a tie stall is, 2/3 of them don't want them. 2/3 of them are supportive of removing tie stalls as a way of managing cows. I think the survival of our tie stall industry is important for many reasons. Within the US, it's part of the plain sect. There's a religious component to it with our Amish dairies. And a period of untethered exercise becomes, I think, extremely important in a component of meeting the public halfway and communicating what you're doing. So that's sort of 2 to 6 hours of untethered exercise, outdoor access overnight at appropriate times of the year and so on. And you're certainly seeing changes in your code that will be implemented from now through April 2027. But where does it stop? That's tie stalls. Well, what about other management systems? I mean, we house cows in freestalls. I'm talking about housing right now. So should dairy cows be provided access to pasture? And again, when you ask people, the overwhelming majority say yes. 90% of people think cows should live outside because the books they read when they were kids all had cows on pasture. And all the advertising they see in supermarkets and grocery stores have cows at pasture. So when we keep telling people and reinforcing that's what cows do, it's a surprise to them when they live in a barn. Shouldn't really be a surprise, should it? If you're a farmer, why would you graze a cow? Well, you graze cows because you live in a favorable climate. Okay? That isn't. Okay? So, okay, off for now, maybe in the summer. You do it because it's economically viable. So you have sufficient rain and grass growth to create the dry matter that you need to support a certain amount of milk production in a certain market. It makes sense. I went to southern Chile, south part of Chile, they're all grazing herds, perfect climate and grass growth. You go to the South Island of New Zealand, perfect climate for grazing and grass growth. It makes sense to do that. In my view, it makes no sense to graze in Wisconsin, but that's another story. You do it because you're allowed to do it. There's this thing called the DNR. We have the Department of Natural Resources. They're very concerned about the waterways and the little creeks that meander through farmsteads. They don't want you to graze in many situations. I go around designing housing for those farms because they've been told not to graze. You do it because it's part of a standard. If you're shipping organic milk, you're required to graze. You're required to provide a certain amount of dry matter intake from pasture. However, even if you graze, most farmers that do that house. You still have to provide housing usually half the year because of the weather and because of the climate. So it doesn't get away from the fact that we still need buildings for our dairy cows, and they still need to work for our dairy cows. Interestingly, when we ask cows what they think and give them the choice between pasture or a building, they choose both. They like to be outside at night. There's studies showing that the cows were outside during the night, and they like to be inside during the day. So they like to be in the building under a shelter during the daytime. And this study was done in British Columbia, not particularly extreme climate. Higher producing cows like to be in the barn, nearer the feed supply perhaps. If it's raining, they like to be in the barn. And even when we overstock the barn, they still make the same choice. So you can make the housing less desirable, and cows are still actively seeking it out. So housing isn't a deterrent to cows. Cows use housing, but they also kind of like to be outside. And so I challenge everyone that I speak to in the dairy industry is to work on some of the time. Some of the cows, some of the time. Planned pasture access, not when it looks like that. Not when it's muddy or raining, but when you're able to do so, get some of the cows out some of the time. And a lot of our dairies use that in their marketing. We have a dairy that ships its own cheese products from the farm, and they will always ensure that their heifers are on the pasture when they're having visitors to the dairy. Use it. Use that mechanism for communicating with the public, because some of it is good for cows. Planned pasture access, getting cows off concrete on a softer surface at certain times of the year, at certain times of the lactation cycle, can help. We do things that even when we educate the public about are negative, and that would be cow-calf separation. Removing the calf at the point of birth is a negative for the industry. All of our industries globally around the world have gone down the road of earlier and earlier cow-calf separation. Very, very common. And when we talk about that with consumers, it's 100% negative. They really don't like that concept. And even when you try to educate them, sometimes it even makes it worse. And so we're seeing a lot more interest, a lot more negative articles, such as this one, regarding cow-calf separation. And I do believe over the next 5 to 10 years, we're going to have to find a way to do something different to maintain that social trust. And this is one where legislation that would overnight force people to do something that they are ill prepared to do would have such a negative consequence to animal welfare. I shudder. But I do think with time we can think of doing something different, because our beef colleagues do it all the time, and they've found a way to do it. And if you look at how we dairy and how we manage the cow at the point of calving, I don't think we can argue that we've solved all of the issues. 1/3 of my farms put fresh cows in a sick cow pen for several days after calving. cows that may have salmonella or mycoplasma mastitis, and we're mixing them with fresh cows. That's not the end point. That's not the big solution that we're all looking for, and yet many farms do that. So I don't think we can argue from a position of strength here. And Nina von Keisling and I just published this article where we did challenge the researchers to start answering the questions that you guys are going to have about going down this road and putting together an economic model that we can use in our decision making. And I know at least one farmer here present today is doing this right now and maintaining contact between cows and calves for a prolonged period, and so it's really gratifying to see that. This is the Skara herd in Sweden. They have a website you can see down here, and I'll ask you to spend a time on your phone and just clue that up and check out the video that they have on their experiences of maintaining cow-calf contact on that farm, and it's kind of a cool video. So what I want to do for the rest of my session is to focus on building better barns, to build that facility to make sure that cows are maintained injury-free and in good welfare. Because whether you're grazing or not, or whether you're 100% housed all the time, it's incumbent on us to house appropriately and properly. So what does that look like? Well, I'm going to focus on the components of cow comfort that are largely related to the optimization of rest, which looks at lying time and how cows achieve that rest. There are other components of cow comfort that are important that we'll touch on, and that is shelter from climate extremes. Yeah, it's cold outside, but it will get hot in the summer as well, so we'll talk a little bit about heat stress just to warm ourselves up this afternoon. Feeding and drinking, that's obviously a great interest to nutritionists and others, and there's a lot of science around feed access and feeding behavior that I won't go into, but you guys have Trevor DeVries here, so he's probably spoken to you at length about all that cool stuff. I think walking and exercise is important, and I know the folks in Montreal are looking at the importance of exercise, and that comes back to that restriction of movement issue with tie stall housing, and so there is a requirement for some movement, and we're trying to quantify that right now. But for now, I'm going to focus on resting behavior. And if you've heard me speak before, I'm a lover of deep-bedded surfaces rather than mats and mattresses, and the available data continues to tell me that deep bedding is best for dairy cows. And in my world, that's predominantly sand. There's a growth in the use of reclaimed manure solids, so we're seeing that increase in its usage. And other people around the world use different organic materials, be it sawdust, straw lime mixes, paper alternatives, and so on. But sand, to me, compared to a mat or a mattress product, has repeatedly been shown to improve lying times and result in less lameness. And so we've got data here from Laura Solano's work, 140 dairies in Ontario, Alberta, and Quebec. Sand by far achieved the most impressive lying times. 11.7 hours is the number there on top. Most of the mattress type products were about 10.5, except for the water beds, which were 9.7 hours. I get a lot of heat for my negativity towards water beds, and I will continue with that. When we look at lameness and injury, we've consistently shown an improvement in lameness when we transition from mattresses to sand. And there's reasons for that related to how the cows rest and behave. But the biggest thing that we're seeing from our animal welfare audits is the high rates of hock injury on cows on mats and mattresses, and it is very difficult to manage that with a flat wearing surface. And you're challenged to add more bedding, but then you've got a flat surface and the bedding just blows off the top of that. So improving hock health is a real challenge with those types of products. And we see a great reduction in hock injury and in some cases knee injuries with sand bedding. This is the data from Jim Sulphur's work in Minnesota, just showing you on waterbeds the very high rate of severe lameness. And the explanation for that is really the lack of cushion and support those lame cows are getting as they transition from lying to standing and standing to lying. Because the water disappears as the cow is getting up and down, there is no cushion and traction and support at that critical time. So it's difficult for cows to maintain their normal pattern of rest. And so again, repeatedly, we see less lameness and much less severe lameness on a deep-bedded surface, which facilitates the ability of a cow, even with a sore foot, to get up and down more easily and reduce the risk of continued and chronic lameness. This is a study my colleagues and I did a few summers ago now. And what you see here is a group of 8 waterbeds. We designed these waterbeds with foam underneath, not just the concrete. We put foam underneath. And what we're doing is actually putting well water through those mattresses to help cool the cows in the summer. So this study was done in the summer to put cooled water through the mattresses, and this is now a commercial product that is sold, that is out there. And we found that it worked when you could get a damn cow to lie on it. Because what you see on the other 8 stalls is just deep-bedded sand. And the cows are just lying down for 12, 13 hours a day. And when we forced cows to just lie in those water beds, they lay down for 9 hours a day. Exactly the same kind of data that Laura Solano found from commercial herds in Canada. So that's kind of the reasoning behind my skepticism for the use of water beds. And there's reasons for that they just don't seem to work particularly well for adult cows. Maybe you can get away with younger animals and heifers. I don't care so much there. But for our big old cows, those deep-bedded stalls, that extra comfort and cushion really seems to work well for that. So maybe a little explanation for my bias there. Really what we're talking about is this cushion, traction, and support. This ability for the cow to transition from lying to standing and standing to lying. That is absolutely critical for a cow to maintain normal patterns of rest. To lie down when she wants to, for as long as she needs to. Okay, I'll say it again. When she wants to, for as long as she needs to. It's not necessarily about the hours, but it's about that freedom and ability to lie down when it's necessary. You get that on more softer, more cushioned, more giving surfaces with higher rates of traction. Within the mattress, different types of mattress, the softer ones that give more traction perform better than the harder ones. So I've literally done thousands of these, converting mattresses to sand through lots of different ways of doing it, repouring curves and digging the platform out, putting fiberglass pipes or landscape timber on the back of platforms, even angle irons in this case, or even just repouring a curb on the back of the platform. So we've done lots, we know how to do it, and it's been successful for the most part. And for the last 10 years, it's been kind of dull for me because I don't make any money out of selling sand. I don't receive a heck of a lot of benefit from it. And there's been nothing new to talk about, really. But then this company from Denmark, Sternholm, came along last year. And they realized that the machine that they developed to basically clean water, they're in the sort of sewage business, works well for sand-laden manure. And so we have a new player on the block that about half a dozen dairies in Wisconsin have installed these machines that are compatible with both small and larger dairies to separate sand. And honestly, I cannot tell between the separated sand and the fresh sand on these farms. It cleans the sand that well. And it really is, for me, a game changer and something that's really exciting about the use of sand bedding, which I understand is difficult. We've seen the data again this morning about sand-laden manure. But sand is so good for cows, finding better ways to recycle it and use it. That's exciting. And so you'll see this sand washer. I absolutely believe that a lot of dairies are going to be interested in what I think is a game changer. So that's the surface. We define the stalls with divider loops, and over the years we've come up with divider loop recommendations and numbers. And the numbers have been, they're not accidental, they're hard fought. There's a 5-inch gap underneath that bar to stop cows getting their front feet caught. That angle is positioned 20 to 22 inches past the brisket locator to lie the cow straight in the stall, to tell that cow where to lie down without injuring her, without extending so far back that it creates rubs. That bar is 12 inches above the surface of the stall so that a cow can lunge over the top when she needs to side lunge. For example, if on a head-to-head platform there's another boss cow sat in front of her, she can lunge to the side. But it's not so low that she may hook her leg over the top and get stuck getting up in the loop. So those numbers are important. They make an impact, and the loop can do this or that and end up with a diameter such that the neck rail is in the correct position. So the placement of the neck rail is dependent on the opening of the loop, and there are numbers for that, the internal diameter. So they're not accidental, they've been arrived at for a reason, because they work. And a lot of manufacturers have copied that, and we've moved not to standpipes concreted in the platforms, but to horizontal mounting bars, and this is the latest version with the 2 bars, one above the loop, one at the middle, but positioning it so that the cow can lunge below that bar and not be confronted by an obstruction as she's lying in the stall. So again, the positioning of these things makes sense, but those horizontal mounting bars give us flexibility in terms of what width that we can provide in those stalls. And then different ideas emerge, and so the latest idea for loops is not to use metal, but to use fiberglass. And I get that okay, there's some thought to that might be a good idea, to use fiberglass, potentially lighter weight, less risk of injury, less risk of bending and so on. And so one of the most common manufacturers of those type of products, EasyFix, has 3 different types of products. They had 4. The EasyFix Dream looks the most similar to what we've just been talking about. I wouldn't necessarily use any of the others because we've kind of proved that those don't work as well. But you also see that they're concreted into the stall platform. That's their major fixing. So that's kind of a 20-year-old concept. There have been various versions of this. This is one of their versions where you don't sort of have a loop. You don't join these together. You just have these sort of floating bars. And I get they're cow-friendly because the cows can rub against them and they bend and so on, but they don't do a particularly good job of placing the cow when she's lying down, and some cows just get darn confused by the whole process. And some of that is on the website. When you look at some of the dimensions and numbers they're using, 44 to 46 inches for stall width for an adult cow is what I started my career fighting. That was where we were 20 years ago. For some reason, the cows shrink in size in these stalls when they lie down. I don't fully comprehend why that is, but that's their recommendation. And their stall lengths are 2 to 3 feet shorter than what we've been doing for more than 10 years. So you still have to fight against it, don't you? Here we are in 2024. Some good ideas, some not so good ideas. And it's upon you to find the good information that's readily available to us now, that you don't just trust someone to do the right thing, because that can be a problem. We've had recommendations on stalls that haven't changed for the last 10 years, readily available through most of the audit programs. The recommendations you'll see in Pro Action are consistent with this through Dairy Farm, on our website, and various other places. And we have science and studies that have been done to show that we improve resting times and we reduce lameness and negative aspects of cow health when we do this right, when we promote good rest. And then there's the neck rail. We talked about the opening of the loop, putting the neck rail in the correct position. This one is a little bit confusing because most installers of hardware will be used to, on mat or mattress surfaces, installing the neck rail above the brisket locator, just right above it, right there. And that's because a cow on a flat surface will be able to stand all the way back to the rear edge of the platform. But in a deep-bedded stall, that's different. You have sand or whatever bedding material you're using, and the cow won't stand on that concrete curb. They will stand either inside or outside the curb. If they stand inside, all the urine and fecal matter mixes with the bedding. And I can tell you, it's a disaster. So you don't want that to happen. You have to have the cow perch, standing half in and half out of the stall. And you're told, oh, perching bad. Because perching is bad in a mat or mattress stall, where the front feet are elevated and the rear feet are in the alleyway. That's not the case with a deep-bedded stall. When done right, 90+% of stall standing behavior is perching in sand-bedded stalls, and we have 40% less lameness. So how bad can it be? So what we do in those farms is we pull the neck rail back about the width of the rear curb. So in those deep-bedded stalls, that neck rail is pulled back closer to the curb. So that's the adjustment you have to make, and it's a mistake that still continues to be made here in 2024, that the neck rail goes too far forward in these stalls. And you're dealing with manure and urine and mess. It doesn't work. It's never worked and won't. And then somebody comes along and says, well, let's, instead of a flat neck rail, let's make a bendy neck rail. Bendy neck rails are really difficult to position, to maintain that correct standing position in a deep-bedded stall. You see this? There's a little Finnish red cow here. We want that, okay? We don't want this. And so with that bend in the neck rail, it's almost impossible to locate that darn thing in the right place. It's really challenging. When you have a flat neck rail, you can get it done. You can put it in the appropriate position, and all of the cows will be perching, standing half in the stalls. And you can see from the quality of the bedding what that does. We get the lying time, and we get good hygiene. So we've built a comfortable place to lie down. And then the summer comes, and all of your cows live in half the barn. Yeah? They gravitate away from the end walls and the side walls. They're standing there panting. There are a lot of physiological changes that are occurring when cows get hot. There are behavioral changes that are occurring. I'm not going to talk about the physiological ones. There are other people that are focused on leaky gut syndrome, the impacts of heat stress on rumen health, and so on. Much better than I can cover. What I am going to focus on is the behavioral outcomes, the lost lying time. And in our heat stress that your cows will have here in Ontario, that our cows have in Wisconsin, isn't the Florida heat stress. It isn't the heat stress all the time that cows can become accustomed to. It's the heat stress that comes at you for 3 or 4 days at a time. It comes and goes. It's episodic. And it really challenges our cows. Our cows lose about 3 hours a day of lying time in those episodic periods of heat stress. It really has a negative impact. So there are physiological things going on, and then there's just lost lying time. And then all that bunching behavior that drives everybody crazy. Yeah, because grazing cattle are trying to move away from light. They're trying to seek shade even when they're in one of your barns. That means they gravitate away from the side wall and the end wall unless there's a nice breeze blowing, in which case they will seek that out because they will go out and find fast-moving air. So the heat stress discussion has got even more complicated in 2024. We've talked about the impacts on lactating cows, but my colleagues working at Wisconsin and Jeff Dahl in Florida have shown the negative impacts of heat stress on dry cows. So heat stress in a dry cow negatively impacts that cow's production when she starts to milk in the next lactation. Not only that, but it negatively impacts the calf that's in her uterus at that time. When that calf grows and when it starts milking when it joins the herd in 2 years' time. And it impacts that heifer's calf when she has a calf in the future. Negative impacts of heat stress over and over and over again. So that's the reality of really the last 5 years worth of research of looking at heat stress in dry cows. It isn't an immediate loss of milk or an impact on fertility. It's a loss of future milk and future prosperity. When we look at data trying to quantify that, there's virtually none. I'm not aware of any for Canada, so sorry. Research has not been done. For the US, we have one study done 20 years ago with DHI data. It's Norm St. Pierre's 2003 paper looking at losses across all of agriculture, not just dairy cows, of heat stress. So he's using monthly collected data to estimate losses of production due to heat stress. Well, this is our little campus dairy, and we used to have little 50 cows in basically a tin shed, which was just pretty awful during the summer. And these two X's are 1 month apart. This is one of those heat stress spikes, where your cows are hanging on for 1 day and 2 days, and then on the third day it all collapses. We lose about 20 pounds of milk. But then they recover. When that heat stress disappears, they're able to cool during the night, they get back to where they were before. So if you're collecting monthly data, you could completely miss this. You could miss all of that loss. So I have to assume that that St. Pierre data and all the data that he showed somewhat underestimates the true cost of heat stress. So it's a minimal number, not a maximum. And what does that number look like? Well, for us, when we model that for Madison, Wisconsin, which is on about the same latitude as London, Stratford kind of area, about 77 days of heat stress. So we have about 77 days above a temperature of about 20 degrees centigrade, which is your trigger point for heat stress in cows. THI of about 68. So not very hot. You'll be quite comfortable at 20 degrees centigrade, or cows are not. The estimate is about $120 per cow per year. That's the loss from that paper. From that 20-year-old paper, we know we're going to lose about $120 per cow per year from those 77 days of heat stress. I would suggest it's similar for you. Maybe not quite as much, maybe on some years more. But again, remember, this is an underestimate. What about the data that we're seeing from the dry period? Because that really wasn't included. What about dry period heat stress? Subsequent loss of about 3.5 kilos of milk per cow per day. So those heat stressed dry cows will be negatively impacted when they start milking. Okay? So what can we do? Well, there are mechanisms to help cool cows that use water and that use air. We're going to focus here on the use of water. I kind of like soaking cows in the holding area when I know the cow's standing there. I really dislike this, where for the most part I wander into barns and there's water being sprayed into the alleyways and the cows are lying in the stalls. So we've tried to reduce the water cycles, the soaking cycles. We've gone from 2-minute soaking to 30-second soaking. So running the soakers for about 30 seconds every 10 to 15 minutes. Triggering that at about, again, 20 degrees centigrade and doing so more frequently as the temperature increases. So the technology's there. It's a little frustrating seeing how it's used. And in the future, perhaps not quite now, but we have at least 2 or 3 manufacturers of intelligent soaker devices. These are soaker nozzles with an optic sensor that tell the nozzle to open if the cow's there or not. So if there's an obstruction, that's the cow, then the nozzle comes on. If she's not there, then the nozzle stays off. So a more efficient use of water, making sure that we're not wasting water, putting lots of water in the alleyways, making sure the water gets on the cow. That's the future. Stuff has to get cheaper, but perhaps we can start looking at that for certain risk groups, high-producing cows, perhaps dry cows. The bottom line is soaking helps. It helps reduce those negative physiological impacts. It helps reduce the lost milk production, fertility, and so on. What it doesn't seem to do is impact lying time very much. It doesn't seem to help that. And that's perhaps because the cows are standing under the feed line soakers rather than lying in the stalls. So the data is pretty equivocal on that. And so we wanted to really attack the lying time. We wanted to improve and maintain rest in our dairy cows during those periods of heat stress. So how do we go about doing that? Well, a lot of negativity towards using air, but let's just get back to your cup of coffee in the morning. When you blow across the top of that cup of coffee, you cool it, yeah? And you do it by removing the hot air and replacing it with cool air and maintaining a favorable thermal gradient for that coffee to continue to cool. We can do the same thing for cows. Looking at where the cow is resting, move the air around that cow and maintain a favorable thermal gradient for cooling. And so what we've seen in our industry is a transition from naturally ventilated barns to lots of different types of barns. It's not the swine industry or the poultry industry. We like a little variety in our dairies, and so we've seen tunnel barns, tunnel hybrid barns, positive pressure barns, cross-ventilated facilities with baffles and with fans, about 6 main types of facility. Let's look at that in a little bit more depth. Let's look at the airspeed. Let's try to answer the question, does airspeed keep cows lying down? Because before we did this, we didn't know. We guessed it might, but we didn't know. So what we did was we have a treatment here where those fans are on a variable frequency drive. We can speed them up and slow them down or turn them off. So we can create a controlled treatment with no extra airspeed and monitor what these cows do. We can control the fans at 60% of speed and 100% of speed to give them 2 different air treatments, airspeed treatments. And then we can follow those cows over days, including about 128 cows through groups of 8 groups of 16 cows through these different treatments. So that's what we did for the summer of 2020. These are the stalls showing the low and the high speed treatment. So what you see here is the 16 stalls, and our aim was to be above 200 feet per minute, which in metric is 1 meter per second. So every stall was above 1 meter per second, or 200 feet per minute. That was the low speed treatment. The high speed treatment, when the fans were on full, we were shooting for more than 400 feet per minute, or more than 2 meters per second. And all but that one stall, we kind of achieved that. So we have a low and a high speed treatment. These are the averages down here, and then a no treatment. And we compared what those cows did under those different treatments, and I'll show you what they did. We maintained rest with the fan treatments at both 60 and 100% speed. We lost lying time as temperature increased with no airspeed. Okay? It wasn't no airspeed, it was no supplemental airspeed. The fans over the stalls were off. And so as they got warmer, we saw about an hour difference in lying time. We lost an hour of lying time. The same pattern with body temperature. As the temperature increased, body temperature increased with no fans. We were able to maintain
body temperature with the fan treatments, maintaining that thermal gradient for heat loss. Make sense? And yes, it did impact milk, okay, of the order of about 2.5 kilos. Okay, so fan treatments kept cows resting, maintained production, and maintained body temperature. So there's a minimum cooling airspeed, and we factor that in to be about 200 to 400 feet per minute, or 1 to 2 meters per second, not up here, right down here where the cows are. We measure that 0.5 meters or 1.5 feet above the stall surface. So we're measuring that airspeed where the cow is lying down, where she's experiencing that airspeed. That's what we call the minimum cooling airspeed. So how do you get that? That's what you really want to know. How do you use these fans? Well, you have to realize that fans create a cone of air. You see that cone of air in the fogging demo there. But below the fan, for about 20 feet or so, there's a quiet zone. There isn't a lot of fast-moving air there. So to bathe the cows in that 1 to 2 meters per second, you're going to have to overlap the cones, which gets back to fan distance and fan angle. So we had these kind of rough recommendations here, spacing fans every 24 to 30 feet or so, angling them down. Basically, the angle is immediately below the next fan. Okay? What we then did is we went to a bunch of farms to look at that, to see how farms were implementing the recommendations that we had. And so we're able to check farms and what we call airspeed map them using this little device. This is a little Kestrel device, costs you about $300-400 on a little 1.5 foot high tripod, and we stick that in the stall where the cow lies down. And we go around the barn in a prescribed manner. These are the different maps we use for the different types of barn, and we map the airspeed. And in the study, we actually measured 2 speeds. One was standing height, and one was resting height. And we put those numbers over the top of each other. I'll show you those in a moment. We still have a lot of naturally ventilated barns, as do you. It's still a good option in a varied climate where it isn't too hot in the summer, but there are issues with it. There are challenges with natural ventilation because the extra ventilation that you need in the summer, you have to hope for coming from the wind. You don't have control over it. Sometimes the wind doesn't blow and you're out of luck. Okay? That's what you lose, that vagary, that issue is taken away when you use a mechanically ventilated barn. You can prescribe air exchange. Yeah? You can have a certain fan capacity and move air at a certain amount. That's the biggest difference between those different types of facility. But again, natural ventilation is cheap, it's low cost, it's worked for years, it's still okay in certain climates. But you have to locate the fans. We have to get the fan airspeed correctly. And so these are the maps that we draw, where the stalls are in yellow here. This is a 3-row pen. And these blue things are the fans. And the airflow in this barn is going in this direction. And these 2 numbers I'm giving you here, there's the standing height above the lying height. And you can't read the numbers from the back, I know, but the red ones are bad, okay? So red is below 1 meter per second or 200 feet per minute. So red is bad, remember that, okay? So there's a fair bit of red here, folks. We've got a total fail here, even though these fans are 36 feet apart, and we've got fans along that sidewall. Something going on. And then we've got plenty of red over here, even though the fans are 24 feet apart. They're the prescribed distance apart. So why are we failing? Largely because we didn't have enough angle. So Mitch, the farmer, kind of got pissed off when I delivered this report. I don't deliver a lot of good news these days, it seems. I try, but sometimes I fail. And so Mitch got his airspeed meter out and realized, yep, I haven't got the angle right on these fans. And that's Basically, you have to do it how you have to do it. You have to measure the airspeed where the cows live and re-angle the fans. He also found out they were using the wrong belts on some of the belt drives, and so he replaced those. On this farm, these fans are 36 feet apart. You can see them located here on this head-to-head platform. And this isn't perfect, but it's pretty darn good. It's common to miss out a little bit on this first fan because there's a wall right here. You see that divider wall? It's kind of hard to get the airspeed in that first stall because of that wall and because of the angle of that first fan. But the rest of it looks great, all black numbers. So they got a tick. They got good news. I delivered good news that day. This one, not so much. There's lots of fans. The airflow is in this direction. We've got fans over the feed bunk here, fans over the stall, but tons of red. Again, placement and angle. We just didn't have sufficient angle, and those fans were clearly on one side of the stall platform, only focused on the one stall. These stalls over here weren't getting any airspeed. So what we did was we moved these fans over here. So we don't really need a lot of air movement over the feed bunk. Use those fans where the cows are most of the time in the stalls, get the airspeed where the cows need it in the resting space. And this is just an emphasis. I hear a lot, well, the cows on the sidewall don't need fans because, you know, the wind's blowing out there. Not really. Every row of stalls needs a row of fans to generate the air speeds predictably that we're talking about. The 1 to 2 meters per second, measured 1.5 feet, 0.5 meters above the stall surface. They got the fans over this row of stalls, looks pretty good. You can double up on fans, as we did in our study. That helps with wiring costs. Remember, copper's expensive. Yeah, so if you wire 2 fans to one post, yeah, it's better than wiring one fan and another fan on 2 separate posts. And that can work. Or buy a bigger fan. Yeah, these big 72-inch cyclones will move a lot of air a long distance. And again, you will decrease the wiring necessary to put that in place. I know some of you have these. Big ass fans, high volume, low speed fans. It's in the name. These are not ideal. They create certainly a different barn aesthetic. You don't have all these basket fans all over here. I get that. Maybe even looks a little nicer. They're efficient. Yeah, they're expensive to buy, but they're efficient in terms of electrical usage. But they do weird things to air. They do weird things. So we worked with a company that went to these talks, realized they needed to do something. So they did modify the blades on these fans and challenged us to come to one of their barns and take a look. And so we did. I drove 6.5 hours to this barn and I airspeed mapped it. Okay, did this last year. These fans are, you can see where they're located, 48 feet apart. And when we airspeed mapped that barn, 58% of the stalls were under 1 meter per second. The red, see the red? The air does weird things. The airspeed isn't directly below the fan. It kind of comes off the blade in that direction. So there is the potential to create the airspeed you need as long as you can kind of work out where that is. The challenge is there's a big gap in the middle where we're not getting the speeds that we need. And there is a problem of locating these fans close enough together. They say they can go probably to 40 feet, but then you create so much turbulence between them, they start to have negative impacts on their function. So it is just very difficult to layer air at the speed that we're talking about that keeps cows lying down with these types of products. They're not my favorite for freestall barns. For bedded packs, I think they have some usage because there are fewer barriers to air movement within those bedded packs. There's less concrete, there's less stall dividers and so on. So I get that. I can see that there's some function there. And you're, again, having to drive heavy equipment in, and you can locate those fans up and out of the way. So when implementing this advice of getting adequate airspeed where the cows are lying down, there's a variety of ways of doing it. There isn't just like one solid recommendation I can give you, but check with an airspeed device. Measure the airspeed, double check that you've got angle and direction. Those are really the key things that you need to focus on. But maybe you want to take the fans and just stick them on the sidewall and have done with it. Let's use a positive pressure system and force air into the barn from the sidewalls. So this is a positive pressure barn where the fans aren't over the platform now, they're stuck to the sidewall. So this is a growing hybrid approach that's being used. This was a barn that was a remodel. It was added to a naturally ventilated facility, and with positive pressure, you can absolutely do that. You can stick this positive pressure barn on the end, and all the positive pressure will just force any excess air into the naturally ventilated barn, no problem. You couldn't do a tunnel or a cross negative pressure system in this regard. You'd have to convert the whole thing. That's why this farm went this route. So we did an airspeed map of just this section here, just showing in this barn with 36 fans on either side of the wall, blowing air into the space in a positive pressure design. So what did it look like? Well, this video will start up on the left-hand side, but the risk with this is that we miss the platform. We have to get sufficient angle on that fan to get the airspeed that we need in the stalls. And unfortunately, this was one of those bad news visits where these custom wood-built structures that were holding the fans were kind of all built wrong. I'm not sure they really want to change them, but as you can see, we're missing the inside stall. And when we airspeed mapped it, that's exactly what was happening. The air was shooting over the top. We were getting adequate airspeed in some of the stalls on the opposite stall platform, but not on the one nearest the fan. So again, the air is coming from this direction. So a little bit disappointing, potentially of use, but you have to be very careful at the angle, mounting angle of those fans. Another positive pressure approach is a plenum design that we're going to be investigating, not this coming summer, but next summer, because we have some USDA money. This is basically bringing outside air and piping it down from a fixed plenum, which is located above the cows, and here we have one above the feed area and one above the stalls. A lot of tunnels, a lot of retrofits. It's very easy to retrofit an existing naturally ventilated barn into a negative pressure tunnel ventilated barn. So we're seeing lots of those, and they're designed really very easily. The fan companies are getting very used to doing this and have become very effective at converting these barns, and they do perform well. We can airspeed map those stalls. Again, they have fans above the stalls, and we're getting good air exchange and good airspeed where the cow's lying down. But we also have lots of cross vents. Some cross vents with baffles, some with fans, and this one is a favorite of mine with curtain baffles, and the airspeed map of that barn is perfection. Our goal is 90% of the stalls with airspeeds above 1 meter per second. There's no red on that barn. Baffles are located perfectly. Air is traveling from the inlet all the way through the barn and being exhausted. So that barn gets the perfect score. Some barns don't. This is another cross vent with baffles in the wrong place. So this baffle is correctly located, but you see some red here and here because this baffle is in the wrong place. The air is going in this direction, and it's not being pushed into the stall, it's been pushed into the feed bunk here. So we're getting low speeds all the way down this platform, and potentially low speeds in this platform down here. So how do we fix it? We move the baffle. And that's actually happening this week on this farm. So we're moving the baffle to this location here. And from that baffle, we should be able to get the airspeed we need for a stall, an alley, and a stall. So about 30 feet or so. We can positively influence the airflow underneath that baffle. In terms of running cost, half a dozen cross-ventilated barns that we looked at, we're still seeing a lot of variation in our industry, which is they all perform well, but it's a waste of money. We have some barns that are running at $123 per cow per year to run, and we have some barns that are working just as well, running at $46 per cow per year to run. So we have to look at design, number of fans, air changes an hour, the amount of air movement per cow, because we like to overstock in our industry, so we have to be careful about the air per cow as well as the volume exchange. The advantage of these curtain baffles rather than the older tin-style baffles is that we can bring them down in the summer when we need to develop that airspeed below the baffle to cool the cows. But we can also retract the baffle in the winter and get it up and out of the way so that the air flows better through the barn, more predictably through the barn without getting stuck at lower air speeds. So we have criteria for effective ventilation. It involves sufficient air exchange. That's easily designed through fan capacity. It involves target airspeed. We do that through mapping, fan and baffle placement. We make sure that the system works as well across all seasons, and above all, that it's economical. It gets back to the losses that you're incurring from heat stress. So we have specifications that I won't get too into the numbers that we use to help design these facilities to make sure that we have adequate air exchange. We use those numbers. We calculate how much it costs to run the barn, modeling a typical meteorological year, and we tell the farmers how much it's going to cost to install and how much it's going to cost to run. So in our workshops, we design facilities. This is an 800 cow barn, and we've designed that 800 cow barn with all 6 options for different ventilation concepts. So just to give you some idea, because again, where we are is very similar to Madison, Wisconsin, very similar latitude. Naturally ventilated barn is about $23 per cow per year to run. You're running those fans for those 77 days during the summer. Okay, so pretty cheap. A mechanically ventilated barn, generally double that. It's generally about $50 per cow per year when designed correctly. So you're doubling the cost. But remember, our losses were about $120 per cow per year, minimum. So spending $50 to save $120 seems to make some sense to me. Okay? If it starts to cost $120 per cow per year to run it, then that doesn't make a lot of sense. Yeah? The cheapest of all the mechanically ventilated options is the cross baffle, because you're creating free airspeed with a curtain. Once you've installed the curtain, you don't have to pay electricity to run it. Okay? So you're creating that free moving airspeed. So $40 per cow per year in this instance. The most expensive barn to build is the positive pressure hybrid, because it has the most fans, those fans along the sidewalls. That barn has 200 fans for an 800 cow facility versus an equivalent cross vent with a baffle, 61. They're different types of fans, but every fan you hang is a fan you have to maintain. You have to wire it, install it, and maintain it. So if you're talking about 200 of them versus 60, we can have a conversation about which you should do. Okay? Within a fan manufacturer, and this is just one manufacturer, looking at their different fan options, you can find a huge variation in their efficiency. Their efficiency is the CFM per watt, cubic feet per minute of air produced per watt of electricity. It's the same manufacturer, that accounts to, for this 1,500 cow tunnel, $20 per cow per year difference between the most cost-effective fan and the most expensive fan. So look at the electrical usage of fans. It varies. Take a look at that. It's not the only factor you use when choosing them, but it's an important factor. Look at the electrical usage. And those variable frequency drive units that you hang on the fans, that the fan guys want to sell you, and you go, geez, $500 per fan to install a variable frequency drive? It's worth it. It's worth it, because the worst thing you can do to a fan is run it at 100% speed. Variable frequency drives save you tons of money. In our 60% versus 100% fan treatment, we had 40% lower speed, which hardly negatively impacted the cow at all, with more than 50% lower cost. We save a lot of money using these fans at lower speeds. So we can achieve the speed that we need, and they don't necessarily need to exceed it. You don't need more than 2 meters per second at 1.5 feet, 0.5 meters above the stall surface. So all of this is important information for you to look at and factor in when you're making choices about ventilation and cooling. And again, remember, every fan you hang is a fan you have to maintain. And if the louvers look like this, they're not moving the amount of air that the fan company designed it at. You can easily lose 24%, even 50% of fan efficiency by just having dirt on the louvers and belts that aren't tight. So what can we do? How do we pull all this together? 2024, what's the achievable target for keeping our cows rested? With a healthy non-lame cow on a deep-bedded stall, fed a TMR, not too long out of the pen at milking time, not overstocked, with a favorable resting microenvironment with good use of airspeed and ventilation, what we see is we can maintain an average of 11.5 to 12.5 hours a day. That's normal. That's what we're looking for. So when we see studies where cows are averaging 10.5 or 9.5, that's not normal. Okay, that's the theory. This is the actual. 12 barns we visited 2 summers ago. In the summer, during heat stress, 12 high-producing herds, half naturally ventilated, half cross-ventilated, so mechanical and natural. 30 cows on each farm, measuring their line times over the course of the week. We averaged 12.1 hours a day, right where we needed to be. 12.1 hours a day of rest. And everybody, except for this farm here, were in the range of 11.5 to 12.5. What made that farm unique? 1.5 cows per stall. Just a little bit overstocked. Just a tiny little bit overstocked. But even he was achieving 11.25. So we know we can do it. When we pull all these things together, we know we can create a comfortable environment. And we need to do that because we need to maintain social trust. We need to make sure that our consumers can consume our dairy products without feeling guilty. Priority one. We need comfortable cows. We need to create comfortable surfaces and the correct loops to define those resting areas. We need the right airspeed at resting height where the cows are experiencing it lying in the stalls, and we know we can do it and maintain adequate rest. So with that, I thank you for listening to me, and I'm happy to answer any questions.